Once upon a time, in a very far-off country, there lived a merchant who had been so fortunate in all his dealings, he was enormously rich. You know how rich he was? He was so rich that Lee Iacocca was a poor relation. But one day, a most unexpected misfortune took place. Their house caught fire and was speedily burned to the ground with all the splendid furniture, the books, pictures, gold, silver, precious goods, underwear, socks, everything. And he had no insurance. Why? Because he was so wealthy, he owned the insurance company, which burned up too. Now, this merchant, wanting to improve his family's fortunes once again, decided to set out on a trip in search of opportunity. Thinking that their father was sure to find success, each child asked him to bring them gifts when he returned, except for his youngest daughter, who was named Beauty, who only asked for his safe return. Her father, hoping to prosper on his trip, said there must be something he could try to get her. "Well, dear father," she said, "as you insist upon it, I beg you, bring me a rose. I haven't seen one since our house burned down and the garden with it, and I love roses so much." So the merchant set out to chase success. After 6 months of trouble and expense, he found himself just as poor as when he started. And to make matters worse, he had to travel home in the most terrible weather. Well, at length he made some sort of tracks through the snow and the blinding wind, and trees got uprooted and started to chase him. He said, "Whoa!" But it didn't do him any good. Now, in the beginning it was rough and slippery, but it became easier and led him to an avenue of trees which ended in a splendid castle. And he went up to the door of this castle. The front door was not locked, and he went in hoping to ask the castle's owner for just a bit of food and a place to sleep for the night. But there didn't seem to be anybody there that he could ask to give him something to eat. He stopped in a room smaller than the rest, where a clear fire was burning and a couch was drawn up cozily close to it. Thinking, well, this must be prepared for someone who was expected, he sat down to wait, and very soon he fell into a sweet sleep. When his extreme hunger wakened him after several hours, he was still alone, but he found a little table with a good dinner on it. And since he had eaten nothing for 24 hours, maybe 25, he lost no time in beginning his meal, hoping that he might soon have an opportunity of thanking his host, whoever it might be. And after his meal, he searched some more, but he couldn't find anyone in this huge castle. Of course, he didn't know every place to look. He looked inside of an old suit of armor, but all he got for his trouble was a face full of rust. In spite of being so cold and weary, when he reached the castle, he had taken his horse to the stable and fed it. Now he thought he would saddle it for his homeward journey, and he returned down the path which led to the stable. The path had a hedge of roses on each side of it, and the merchant thought he had never seen or smelt such exquisite flowers. They reminded him of his promise to his youngest daughter, Beauty, and he stopped and had just gathered one to take to her when he was startled by a strange noise behind him. Turning round, whoa, there was a frightful beast which seemed to be very angry and said in a terrible voice, "Who told you that you might gather my roses? Was it not enough that I allowed you to be in my palace, that I was kind to you? Is this the way you show your gratitude, by stealing my flowers?" The merchant, he was terrified by these furious words, dropped the fatal rose, and throwing himself on his knees, he cried, "Pardon me, noble sir. I'm truly grateful to you for your hospitality, which was so magnificent, but I could not imagine that you would be offended by my taking such a little thing as a rose." But the beast's anger was not lessened by this speech. "You are very ready with excuses and flattery," he cried, "but that will not save you from the death you deserve." "Alas," thought the merchant, "if my daughter Beauty could only know what danger her wish for a rose has brought me." In despair, he began to tell the beast all his misfortunes and the reason for his journey, not forgetting to mention Beauty's request for a rose. A king's ransom would hardly have procured all that my other daughters asked for. And the beast said, I know the type. He said, but I thought I might at least take Beauty her rose. I beg of you to forgive me, for you see, I meant no harm. The beast considered for a moment, and he said, a little less furious, heck with it. I'll forgive you on one condition. That is, that you will give me one of your daughters. Wow, cried the merchant. What excuse could I invent to bring her here? No excuse would be necessary, answered the beast. If she comes at all, she must come willingly. On no other condition will I have her. See if any of them is courageous enough and loves you enough to come and save your life. The merchant accepted this proposal. Well, he didn't really think any of his daughters would be persuaded to come just to save his life. He figured, well, maybe when I had the house and I had all the money and I owned the insurance company and we had silver furniture, maybe then. But now, I'm just going to come home hungry. And they wouldn't eat. Oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy, oh, boy. Oh, what am I going to do? Farewell, the beast said. Take this rose to Beauty and remember your promise. So he went to gather Beauty's rose and he mounted his horse, which carried him off so swiftly that in an instant he had lost sight of the palace, and he was still wrapped in gloomy thoughts when he stopped before the door of his own cottage, and he thought he must have done the first mile in 58 seconds, which was a track record from Beast House to his house. His sons and daughters, who had been very uneasy at his long absence, rushed to meet him. They were eager to know the result of his journey. Did you bring any money? Did you bring any food? Did you bring any silver cloth? Did you bring any... He told them his adventures from beginning to end, and then they were all very unhappy. The sons declared that their father should not return to this terrible castle and began to make plans for killing the beast. They wanted to kill the beast. The beast didn't do anything to them, but he reminded them that he promised to go back. The girls were very angry with Beauty and said, it's all her fault, and that if she had asked for something sensible, this never would have happened, because he never would have brought it because he didn't have any money. And they complained bitterly. Poor Beauty, she was very upset and said to them, well, yeah, okay, my fault. I caused this misfortune, but I did it innocently. Who would have guessed that just to ask for a rose in the middle of summer, when roses are plentiful, would cause so much misery? But it was my fault, so I'll go back with my father to keep his promise. And as time drew near, she divided all her little possessions between her sisters and said goodbye to everything she loved, and when the day came, they mounted the horse which had brought her father back. It seemed to fly rather than gallop, but so smoothly that Beauty was not frightened. Indeed, she would have enjoyed the journey if she had not feared what might happen to her at the end of it. To their great surprise, as they neared the beast castle, wonderful colored lights began to shine in all directions, and splendid fireworks blazed out before them. This lasted until they reached the avenue of orange trees, where there were statues holding flaming torches, and when they got nearer to the palace, they saw that it was illuminated from the roof to the ground, and music sounded softly from the courtyard. Tina, nina, 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 ni, na, nina, ni, na, nina, ni. In spite of her anxiety, she could not help admiring all the wonderful things she saw. The horse stopped at the foot of the flight of steps leading to the entrance, and when they had dismounted, her father led her to the little room he had been in before, where they found a splendid fire burning and a table daintily spread with a delicious supper. They hardly finished their meal when the noise of the beast's footsteps was heard approaching, and Beauty clung to her father in terror, which became all the greater when she saw how frightened he was. But when Beast really appeared, though she trembled at the sight of him, she made a great effort to hide her horror and saluted him respectfully. This evidently pleased the beast. After looking at her, he said in a tone that might have struck terror into the boldest heart, though he did not seem to be angry. "Good evening, old man." "Good evening, Beauty." The merchant was too terrified to reply, but Beauty answered sweetly, "Oh, hi, beast." "Have you come willingly?" asked the beast. "Will you be content to stay here when your father goes away?" Beauty answered bravely, yes, she was prepared to stay. "I am pleased with you," said the beast. "As you have come of your own accord, you may stay. As for you, old man," he added, turning to the merchant, "at sunrise tomorrow, you will leave. When the bell rings, get up quickly, eat your breakfast, and you will find the same horse waiting to take you home. But remember, you must never expect to see my palace again." Then turning to Beauty, he said, "Take your father into the next room and help him to choose anything you think your brothers and sisters would like to have. There you will find 2 traveling trunks. Fill them as full as you can. It is only just that you should send them something very precious as a remembrance of yourself." They went into the next room, which had shelves and cupboards all round it. They were greatly surprised at the riches it contained. There were splendid dresses fit for a queen, with all the ornaments that were to be worn with them. And when Beauty opened the cupboards, she was dazzled by the gorgeous jewels that lay in heaps upon every shelf. They filled 2 traveling trunks with wonderful things. Then each went to a bedroom to sleep. The father said many prayers for his daughter's safety before he finally fell asleep. He said, he also said, "Our Heavenly Father, please look over us and take after us." Then he said, "Ombamba makuku, amba makuka amba, amba." Amen. The morning bell woke them, and they returned to the little room where they found breakfast ready. There were pancakes, so many pancakes you can't believe it. There was melted butter, and there was syrup, and there was honey. The merchant ate his breakfast in fairly good spirits and with a good appetite, as the beast's generosity made him believe that he might perhaps venture to come back soon and see Beauty. However, Beauty felt sure that her father was leaving her forever, so she was very, very sad when the bell rang sharply for the second time and warned them that the time had come for them to part. They went down into the courtyard where 2 horses were waiting. For a fleeting moment, Beauty thought, "Am I going too?" But no. One was loaded with the 2 trunks, the other was for the father to ride. They were pawing the ground in their impatience to start. Not Beauty and the father, the horses. And the merchant was forced to bid Beauty a hasty farewell. And as soon as he was mounted, he went off at such a pace that he lost sight of them in an instant. He said, "This horse can win the Indy 500. Then Beauty began to cry and wandered sadly back to her own room. But she soon found that she was very sleepy, and as she had nothing better to do, she lay down and instantly fell asleep. Now, listen to this. She dreamed that she was walking by a brook bordered with trees when a young prince, so handsome you could die, he came to her and he said, "Ah, Beauty, you are not so unfortunate as you think." He talked very funny for a handsome prince. "Here you'll be rewarded for all you have suffered elsewhere. Your every wish shall come true. Only try to know me for who I really am, no matter how I may be disguised, as I love you dearly." "What can I do, Prince, to make you happy?" said Beauty. "Only be grateful," he answered. "Do not trust too much to your eyes, and above all, do not desert me until you have saved me from my cruel misery. Trust in your heart. Do what your heart tells you." And boys and girls, I'm going to tell you something. As you go forth in this life, after hearing this story, do what your heart tells you. Don't listen to your friends who tell you to do bad stuff. You know in your heart to do good stuff. All right. After this, she found herself in a room with a stately and beautiful lady who said to her, "Dear Beauty, try not to regret all you have left behind you. You are destined to a better fate. Only do not let yourself be deceived by appearances." Beauty found her dream so interesting that she was in no hurry to awake. But presently, the clock roused her by calling her name softly 12 times. Beauty, Beauty, and then 10 more times after that. And then she got up and found her dressing table set out with everything she could possibly want. And she found dinner was waiting in the room next to her. But eating dinner doesn't take very long when you're all by yourself. And very soon, she sat down cozily in the corner of a sofa and began to think about the charming prince she had seen in her dream. Presently, she heard the beast coming and wondered tremblingly if he meant to eat her up now. However, he did not seem at all ferocious and only said gruffly, "Good evening, Beauty." She answered cheerfully and managed to conceal her fear. He asked if she thought she could be happy in this palace, and Beauty answered that everything was so beautiful that she would be very hard to please if she couldn't be happy here. After about an hour's talk, Beauty began to think that the beast, well, is not nearly so terrible as she had supposed at first. Then he got up to leave and said in a gruff voice, "Do you love me, Beauty? Will you marry me?" "Oh, what shall I say?" cried Beauty. She was afraid to make the beast angry by refusing. "Say yes or no without fear," he told her. "Oh, then my answer is no, beast," said Beauty hastily. "Alas, since you will not, good night, Beauty," he said. And she answered, "Good night, beast," very glad to find that her refusal had not angered him. After he was gone, she was very soon in bed and asleep, and dreaming once again of the unknown prince. She thought he came and said to her, "Ah, Beauty, 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 why are you so unkind to me? I fear I am fated to be unhappy for a long time." And then her dreams changed, but the charming prince was in all of them. When morning came, she decided to amuse herself in the garden, for the sun shone and all the fountains were playing. She was astonished to find that every place was familiar to her, and presently she came to the brook where she had first met the prince in her dream, and that made her think more than ever that he must be a prisoner somewhere in the place, held there by the beast. When she was tired, she went back to the palace and found a new room full of rare birds, which were so tame that they flew to Beauty as soon as they saw her and perched upon her shoulder and her head. And they did not leave droppings as birds usually do, but if they did have an inclination for that, they flew outside and returned with little smiles on their beak. There were more birds in the room farther on, parrots and cockatoos that could talk, and they greeted Beauty by name. She found them so entertaining that she took one or two back to her room, and they talked to her while she ate her supper. How remarkable! Every evening after supper, the beast came to see her, and always before saying goodnight, he asked her, "Beauty, dear Beauty, true in name, true in look, I am overwhelmed. Beauty, will you marry me?" And it seemed to Beauty now she understood him better, that when she said no, he went away quite sad. But her happy dreams of the handsome prince soon made her forget the poor beast, and the only thing that at all disturbed her was to be constantly told to distrust appearances, to let her heart guide her, and not her eyes. So everything went on for a long time until at last, happy as she was, Beauty began to long for the sight of her father and her brothers and her sisters. One night, seeing her look very sad, the Beast asked her what was the matter. Beauty had stopped being afraid of him. Now she knew he was really gentle, in spite of his ferocious looks and his dreadful voice. So she answered that she was longing to see her home once more. Upon hearing this, the Beast seemed sadly distressed and cried miserably, "Oh, Beauty, Beauty, have you the heart to desert an unhappy beast like this? What more do you want for me to make you happy? Is it because, in truth, you hate me that you want to escape?" "No, dear Beast, no," answered Beauty softly. "I do not hate you. I should be very sorry never to see you any more. But I long to see my father again. Only let me go for 2 months, and I promise to come back to you and stay the rest of my life." The Beast, who had been sighing dolefully while he spoke, now replied, "I cannot refuse you anything you ask, even though it should cost me my life. But remember your promise and come back when the 2 months are over, or you may have cause to be very sad. For if you do not come in good time, you will find your faithful beast dead. You will not need any chariot to bring you back. Only say goodbye to all your brothers and sisters the night before you want to return. And when you've gone to bed, turn this ring round your finger and say firmly, 'I wish to go back to my palace and see my beast again.' Good night, Beauty. Fear nothing. Sleep peacefully, and before long you shall see your father once more." Beast had a little tear in his eye, and he left. She packed her clothes and some gifts for her family, and then she went to bed, but she could hardly sleep for the joy of thinking. And when at last she did begin to dream of her beloved prince, she was grieved to see him stretched upon a grassy bank, sad and weary, and hardly like himself. "What is the matter?" she cried. But he looked at her reproachfully and said, "How can you ask me, cruel one? Are you not leaving me to my death, perhaps?" "Oh, don't be so sorrowful," cried Beauty. "I'm only going to assure my father that I am safe and happy. I have promised the beast faithfully that I will come back, and he would die of grief if I did not keep my word." "What would that matter to you?" said the prince. "Surely you would not care." "Indeed, I should be ungrateful if I did not care for such a kind beast," cried Beauty. "I would die to save him from pain. I assure you, it is not his fault that he is so ugly." Just then, a strange sound woke her. Someone was speaking, not very far away, and opening her eyes, she found herself in a room she'd never seen before. Where could she be? She got up, dressed hastily, and then she saw the boxes she had packed the night before were all in the room. While she was wondering by what magic the beast had transported them and herself to this strange place, she suddenly heard her father's voice, rushed out and greeted him joyfully. Her brothers and sisters were all astonished by her appearance. They had never expected to see her again, and there was no end to the questions they asked her. Then Beauty asked her father what could be the meaning of her strange dreams and why the prince constantly begged her not to trust appearances. After much consideration, her daddy answered, "You tell me yourself that the beast, frightful as he is, loves you dearly and deserves your love and gratitude for his gentleness and his kindness. I think the prince must want you to understand that you should reward the beast by doing as he wishes you to do in spite of his ugliness, which is only the outside. And you know, children, so many of us look at just the outside of people, when the inside is what does everything." Beauty could not help seeing that this seemed very probable. Still, when she thought of her dear prince who was so handsome, she did not feel at all inclined to marry the beast. As the weeks passed, Beauty knew she must return, but kept putting it off until at last she had a dismal dream which helped her make up her mind. She thought she was wandering on a lonely path in the palace gardens when she heard groans, which seemed to come from some bushes, hiding the entrance of a cave. And running quickly to see what was the matter, she found the beast stretched out on his side, apparently dying. At the same moment, a stately lady appeared and said very gravely, "Ah, Beauty, Beauty, you are only just in time to save his life. See what happens when people do not keep their promises? If you had delayed only one more day, you would have found him dead." Beauty was so terrified by this dream that the next morning she announced her intention of going back at once, and that very night she said goodbye to her father and all her brothers and her sisters, and as soon as she was in bed, she turned her ring round her finger and said firmly, "I wish to go back to my palace and see my beast again," as she had been told to do by the beast, and she fell asleep instantly and only woke up to hear the clock saying, "Beauty, Beauty," 12 times in its musical voice, which told her at once that she was really in the palace once more. Everything was just as before, and her birds were so glad to see her. But Beauty thought she would never know such a long day, for she was anxious to see the beast again, and she felt as if supper time would never come. Now, you know that feeling when you're expecting something, and sometimes when Mom serves dinner just 15 or 20 minutes or half an hour late, or you're going to a birthday party, and you wait and you think it's forever. Well, that's how she felt. But when it did come, and no beast appeared, she was really frightened. So after listening and waiting for a long time, she ran down into the garden to search for him. Up and down the paths and avenues ran poor Beauty, calling him in vain, for no one answered and not a trace of him could she find. Until at last, quite tired, she stopped for a minute's rest, and she saw that she was standing opposite the shady path she had seen in her dream. She rushed down it, and sure enough, there was the cave, and in it lay the beast, asleep, as Beauty thought. Quite glad to have found us, she ran up and stroked his head. But to her horror, he did not move or open his eyes. Oh, he is dead, and it is all my fault," said Beauty, crying bitterly. "What have I done?" And then, looking at him again, she fancied he still breathed, and hastily fetching some water from the nearest fountain, she sprinkled it over his face, and to her great delight, he began to come to, he began to revive. "Oh, beast, beast, how you frighten me," she cried. And then she said it. "I never knew how much I loved you until just now, when I feared I was too late to save your life. Can you really love such an ugly creature as I am?" asked the beast faintly. "Ah, Beauty, you only came just in time. I was dying because I thought you had forgotten your promise. But go back now and rest. I'll see you again this evening." Beauty, who had half expected that he would be angry with her, was reassured by his gentle voice and went back to the palace, where supper was awaiting her. Afterwards, the beast came in as usual and talked about the time she had spent with her father, asking if she had enjoyed herself, and if they had all been very glad to see her. Beauty answered politely and quite enjoyed telling him about all that had happened to her. And when at last the time came for her to go, and he asked, as he had so many times before, "Beauty, will you marry me?" he asked softly. And her answer this time, "Yes, dear beast, yes." As she spoke, A blaze of light sprung up before the windows of the palace. Fireworks crackled, guns banged, and across the avenue of orange trees, in letters all made of fireflies, was written, "Long live the prince and his bride." Turning to ask the beast what could it mean, Beauty found that he had disappeared, and in his place stood her long-loved prince. At the same moment, the wheels of a chariot were heard upon the terrace, and two ladies entered the room. One of them Beauty recognized as the stately lady she had seen in her dreams. The other was so grand and queenly that Beauty hardly knew which to greet first. But the one she already knew said to her companion, "Well, Queen, mind you, Queen, this is Beauty, who had the courage to rescue your son from the terrible enchantment. They love one another, and only your consent to their marriage is wanting to make them perfectly happy." The queen looked for a moment at Beauty, and looked at her handsome son, and looked at the other lady, and everybody held their breath. And the queen said, "Of course, I consent with all my heart. How can I ever thank you enough, charming girl, for having restored my dear son to his natural form?" And she tenderly embraced Beauty and the prince, who had meanwhile been greeting the other woman and receiving her congratulation. "Now," said the woman to Beauty, "I suppose you would like me to send for all your brothers and sisters to dance at your wedding." And she did. And the marriage was celebrated the very next week with the utmost splendor. And Beauty and the prince lived happily ever after. And from time to time, Beauty would turn and look at the prince and see the beast. And her heart never knew the difference.